You know, this is the second Baltic University Rectors meeting I've been part of in Visby. The first one was in September 1991. It was then hosted by Lund University, and it was the first meeting in the so-called CBUR, Conference of Baltic University Rectors. It was exactly depending on the fact that the Baltic Sea region opened up and contact became possible. Meeting was held at Visby Hotel, where we all stay. It was a high-level meeting. The King and the Queen of Sweden were invited. They were coming there by their own airplane. The problem was that the weather was not the very best, sort of misty. So the airplane was circulating by Visby, waiting for good conditions to land. But of course, we who were part of, running the conference, so to speak, we were sitting there expecting them to come, but time went on, and the slot that was meant for presentation for the King and the Queen was shrinking, and we thought they will return to Stockholm and there would be no King and Queen. But in the very end, they did land. So there were about 10 or a little more minutes left for the presentation, and the organizers decided I was going to use those minutes for presentation of the Baltic University Programme, which was considered the most interesting component in the agenda for the presentation. So I used it very much for discussing what will be ahead of us in the Baltic University, and especially showing a film that was produced by St. Petersburg State University, organized by Professor Viktor Jonov, who is with us today also. The film was about the Leningrad Dam, the big dam that was built over the Gulf of Finland by air. And it was quite spectacular, considering that only a few months earlier it had been forbidden even to take a photograph on the streets in St. Petersburg. And now it was possible to do this by air photo. So this was shown, and you might know that the Swedish king is very much concerned with the environment, so he liked it quite much, and we had a good discussion after this. This was then the beginning 2 weeks later, so we started the Baltic program with the first satellite TV broadcasts, and this was one out of very many during the year. There were 10 of them. 2 of them were so-called space bridges, meaning 2 or 3 universities knit together using satellites, sometimes 2 satellites. And there were quite many dramatic events in this series of broadcasts. The first year we organized what's called the Baltic Sea Environment. It was a course run by satellite TV with printed material being part of it. We had 70 universities who started. There were 3,600 students following these broadcasts, and we thought it was quite a success, considering that when I started to talk about Baltic University Programme as a possibility 1 or even 2 years earlier, people were just shaking their heads and thought this guy is crazy. What happened is, when it started, 70 universities in the fall of 91, in the spring of 92, we were 84 universities and so on. And of course, it was because we had the possibility to communicate over what was quite closed iron curtain up to then. I had personally had contacts with researchers in Russia, in St. Petersburg, in Moscow. I'd been to research conferences. I had cooperation with PAN, Polska Akademia Nauk, the Polish Academy of Sciences. I've been to Warsaw and Krakow and so on. But very little was known about universities in the Central and Eastern Europe. We were looking in catalogs and so on to try to find out who were there and so on. But the end of the Cold War changed all that. And we had the opportunity, a window of opportunity to contribute to more cooperation, to a more friendly regional development, a more peaceful regional development in our part of the world. So, of course, it's not only me or us, it was many, many people who saw this. The region were, had many, many activities. There were cooperation between everything from between farmers, musicians, cities, very important cooperation between cities, filmmakers, of course researchers, etc., etc. Business became soon very important. So there were all kinds of development during the 1990s. And between universities was one important part of it. We were all very happy that it had been a peaceful change from the Cold War situation to now the open situation we had. You might remember that in Caucasus, in the Balkan, it was not at all peaceful, it was war. Here we had very little of that. We had the events in Vilnius, of course, in January 91, otherwise it was not so much. So this was really good conditions for cooperation. Of course, we had this satellite TV broadcasts were dramatic sometimes. For example, I remember the first space bridge that was done, particularly between St. Petersburg and Uppsala. The team came to St. Petersburg. They were unable to set up anything at all because they didn't have current. There was no electricity proper for the thing. And I think in the end they were able to find somewhere in the wall the connection to 16 amps supply for their broadcasting bus. So in the end there was such a broadcast. And in fact there was a similar situation here in Visby in the fall of '93. We started Peoples of the Baltic Conference with a broadcast from Visby. And just before we were going to do this, the electricity disappeared from all of Visby. There was no electricity in the entire city. And we were supposed to do one report from a restaurant on the Baltic Sea region food, and then of course the broadcast. But just before it became too late, the electricity came back, so this was all made in the proper way. There are many dramas. I would just point to the one, we had one broadcast from Berlin, in the Peace Museum, which is just a Checkpoint Charlie. And before we had this broadcast, we went out to one of the places in former DDR to make a report from a factory where they were dismantling ground-to-air missiles. So we made this report out in a tent that was several hundred meters away from the main building because they were dismantling this missiles, and I was standing there talking beside several hundred kilos of explosives, so I probably looked very nervous. And this was the beginning of the disarmament agreements became possible after 1991, or actually a little earlier. Well, we made a total of about 60 hours of films and reports over these years. And I should say that most of these are available on YouTube today, where Baltic University has its own set of reports. So you can look there. And quite of them are quite unique. Another part of the program over the years, which have been very important, of course, is the production of books. And it started from the very beginning in 1991. We produced 10 small books on the environmental situation of the Baltic Sea region. They were distributed between all these 70 universities using channels that were sort of informally set up between the universities. And it was not that easy to get them out into the regions, so to speak, but very many of them did get. And I remember when in 2003 I was entitled to talk about the next step, and there was one teacher coming up, and in her backpack she extracted these 10 booklets. She had been carrying around for about 10 years, using them, teaching every year, and so on. But you know, at that point in 2003, we had developed the concept so much that we produced this big book called Environmental Science. It was meant to be a standard textbook environmental science adopted for the Baltic Sea region. It was just the same kind of approach as you see in very many other subjects, especially in the USA, where you have, you know, immunology, 1100 pages, biology, 800 pages, etc., etc., etc. You have all these big textbooks. This was environmental science, and with all the data interesting for the Baltic Sea region. However, I'm afraid, as far as I can see, it was not much of a success. The universities in the Baltic Sea region seem not to be interested in adopting this kind of approach, using a general understanding of environmental science for their students in this way. Some universities have, but most have not. So this is still a step to take, I think. Well, again, the production of books over the years have been quite big. We have produced about 40 books or so during these years. You can see a few of them up there. Some are more general, for example, environmental science or area studies and so on. Others are more specialized, sustainable agriculture or spatial development, etc. Biogas production, cleaner production, etc. But anyhow, the production of books has been very important for all the activities we have been doing with some close to 10,000 students per year over very many of the years. But of course, time changes. When we started, internet was not much used for emails and so on. We used telex and etc. at the time. Now it sounds ancient compared to the situation today, where everything is internetization is going on in this way. The students are not so interested in having physical books any longer. So what we did in the Baltic program a couple of years ago was to put all the material on the internet. Everything can be downloaded as PDF files or whatever you wish. They can be searched and used as such. And students more and more use their mobile telephones for this. For example, I remember last time I was in Minsk, I was taken around very friendly by two students, and when they went back home, I asked the girl, so how far do you have traveled to come home? Well, 30 minutes, so it's quite much time, it's 1 hour per day. Well, I'm using the time to read Dostoevsky on the mobile telephone. So she was downloading, and looking at mobile telephone. So that's modern life. And of course, when it comes to updating another of the main courses in the Baltic program on sustainable development, we did it entirely online. So this material is now only on the website of the Baltic University. And of course, it would be really nice to take the next step, which is for future, which is called MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses, to make this for us. After all, we are not thousands of universities, but we are hundreds, and it would be something that would be interesting to hear your points of view during the day. Well, when we started more than 20 years ago, in 91, I expected perhaps I find 20 universities which will be interested in cooperation in this way. And we will do something interesting together, especially in the area of research. Well, it turned out that the first meeting, there were 31 universities. A few months later, there were 70, as I mentioned, and today there are over 200. It's still been growing all the time, exactly. Research was important in the beginning. One of the main things we did, for example, was to set up 5 laboratories at the universities developing GIS, Geographical Information Systems. But there were also other research projects. Now, research is coming back a little. During a long period, it's been mostly education. It has also been much cooperation with others for practical projects. For example, cities has been quite important. We're running many projects with cities, how to develop sustainable urban development. Well, when we started then at time, it was still Soviet Union. In the fall of, in the beginning, or rather in the summer of 1991, I was going to go to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Estonia for the first time ever for me. This was August 20. I had the tickets and everything for the ferry. But on that day, the people from Tallinn, Technical University, my contacts, contacted me and explained, don't come. There are 11 Soviet warships in the harbor. And of course, we were surprised and shocked by the August coup then in the Soviet Union. So all the travels were cancelled. But 2 weeks later, it was possible to travel. So I came to Tallinn, I met my friends, I came to Tartu and so on. I continued to Riga using the train, hard class. The train was not only hard, it was also cold and wet. But anyhow, I came to Riga and met people there, especially TV teams all the time, in fact. And I was picked up in Riga by colleagues from Kaunas by car, so we went to Kaunas, and I saw colleagues there. You might remember Lucia Baskauska, so Baskauska, she was one of the main person to support peaceful development in Lithuania at the time, and Linas Kuchininkas, then just a student. Linas is with us today still. Was there, and Linas and myself took a taxi to Kaliningrad. You know, it was nothing special with the taxi, cheap. And we traveled all the time there, all the way there. And Victor, again, he came down using air, you know, just taking the flight down to Kaliningrad to have lunch with us, and then went back. It was Soviet prices still, you know. And of course, we saw the people in Kaliningrad, especially Professor Medvedev, who was rector of the university in Kaliningrad, and I know him since before, so we had contacts then, and he was a good friend, I would say. And then I intended to continue to Gdansk, and he said, sorry, this is impossible. Everyone told me this is impossible. And then I met Medvedev, and he said, well, this will not be easy, but you know, of course, he knows everyone. So he called the head of the, what do you call the border troops of Kaliningrad, etc. And they, so okay, Monday morning, university car, picked me up, went to the border station at Mononovo, I think it's called. There was a very friendly officer. Said, asked excuse for looking at my passport, and another soldier took me to the border station with a small bridge, and they pointed, this is Poland. And so I went over there, like, you know, the spy coming in from the cold, more or less, and sat down in the little hut that was there, and you know, what will happen now? I have no idea. But 10 minutes later, a gentleman came up and said, this Professor Rydén, you know, and of course, he was sent out from Gdansk University. In fact, they had contacts all the time. They contacted the border troops also on the Polish side, so it became quite an interesting international thing. So I was taken by him in his car, out in the forest, small road. And after a few kilometers, there was a big road, main road, and that was the end of the Autobahn built by Hitler for Königsberg. It came that far. So in the middle of the forest, there was the end of this huge motorway. So we went to Gdansk, and I met colleagues in Gdansk who were very active in the Baltic University at the time. And after this meeting, I took the ferry from Gdansk to Stockholm and then train to Uppsala. So I think I was the first person after 1939 who was able to travel on surface, by boat, by car, by train, around the Baltic Sea. you think this is so? I don't know. It's an interesting perspective anyhow. And remember now, Kaliningrad was a closed city up to 1st of January that year. Tartu was restricted access up to January 1st that year. So it was very, very dramatic change. Well, today I'm afraid we are in a way pushed back to that time because of the ongoing crisis. And I think we are in a serious situation. Perhaps I see it more seriously than many of us because I'm so close to it, because of my contact network with especially the physicians for the prevention of nuclear war. So I get all the peace and conflict researchers and the Uppsala Center for Russian Studies and so on. It's not only that we could compare with 1991, we could rather compare with 1983. That was the coldest period of the Cold War. You might remember the shoot-down of the Korean airliner at the time. Today we have a shoot-down of a Malaysian airliner, just as bad. We might think that is nothing to do for us at universities, but only a few weeks back there was the research vessel Aranda, which is a Finnish boat, with Finnish and Swedish researchers have been doing research on Baltic Sea for many years. They were approached by Russian naval vessels in a very unfriendly manner. There have been intrusion in the airspace of Sweden, of Finland, and probably other countries, I don't know all of it. So we are in, I would say, a rather difficult situation today. And what is it for us in this situation? I would say that we have very different from 1991. We have established a university network. It is very solid. We have very friendly contacts. We know each other well. Our role here is to build and continue to build friendship and good relations. We are not representing our governments. We are representing our universities. We are representing science, good knowledge, and this is very, very important in this context when so much rumor, so much ill-based proposals are circulating around. Let's try to be scientific in this sense, looking at good data. Let's try to build on friendship, and let's try to strive for a continued peaceful cooperation in our part of the world. Very important. This is number one priority. Number two priority is, of course, education for sustainable development, which also continues to be a very great challenge. And what I'm doing as a retired former director is mostly to teach education for sustainable development. And I hope I'll be able to continue to do that, both in Russia, in Ukraine, in Poland, etc., in Sweden, of course. So thank you very much for your listening.